Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 150th episode of the Truth Island podcast. Change is perhaps the one thing that is both highly wished for and something to be avoided at all costs. On one hand, when times are tough, most of us often hope for better days to come, a new job, a bigger house, a significant other to enter into our lives. We as humans, to some degree, have an aversion to monotony and are often desperately in search for a giant revelation or inspiration that will come along and guide us down another path. On the other hand, when we often feel that times are too good and we are feeling a bit comfortable in where we are, change can present quite a disturbance in our lives. A new boss could mean longer hours. An ending relationship could spell years of solitude on the horizon. Or even more tragically, with each and every passing day beyond the age of 25, our bodies are slowly becoming older and weaker. Regardless of how one might feel about change, one thing is certain: it is inevitable. Helping me to make sense of quickly changing times, I am once again joined by Kenny. Kenny, how goes life? Do you feel that you are in need of change, or are you happy with the status quo right now?
I'm absolutely happy with the status quo. That could always change.
Now, when you're okay, so you're happy with the status quo. Do you ever develop anxiety and fear of, oh no, my happy status quo might be threatened? Like my rent might go up, my job might change. Like, because you see, people think that when they're happy with the status quo, they're just happy. But some people are liking the status quo, but they still have anxiety and fear that some monkey wrench is going to be thrown into their life and disrupt the status quo. So how do you deal with that?
Well, to be honest, yeah, I mean, I feel it. Not as often as I used to when I was a teenager, but I still feel it every now and then. It's one of those things that I simply just don't allow myself to feel for too long. It's never fun to know that, or to believe that your life could change for the worst, and that, in a blink, in the twinkling of an eye, things could go very, very badly for you or your loved ones. Change, and I mean, it's usually fear of the unknown, and the unknown is, well, it's definitely the change that we fear. So how I deal with that personally, twofold. The first thing for me, the most important thing for me, is absolutely prayer. um, that I cannot and I will not downplay how important that is. The second is a training of my mind. Not to say that I'm 100% proficient at it. I'm always learning, but I try not to let my fears or my anxieties last for more than 24 hours.
Okay, man. I feel like you're a magician, and I know magicians don't reveal their tricks, but I'm gonna try and get you to reveal some of your tricks. Let's talk about prayer. If it's private, you don't have to talk about it. Is there something that you ask for or something that you do in your prayers that allows you to kind of that mitigates the anxiety? What specifically do you pray for?
Well, no, nothing's off limits in the sense of I can talk about everything and anything, especially with you, my good man. So it's a matter of prayer is one of those things that over the years I've learned that everybody goes about it very differently. Not everybody, but some people go about it very differently. But the hope is that you get the same effects. But for me, I would say that prayer is communing with the living God. And if I believe that I have a heavenly Father who cares for me and who knows my name, he knows about my life, and who knows that I just a simple man. I mean, dude, I could get hit by a bus walking outside. I could trip on my way. Human beings were so fragile, we're so simple, and we're so breakable that it can be scary. But when I know, and I do know, that there's somebody who is far more powerful than I am and who cares for me as one cares for a child or one cares for a loved one. When I tell him all of my worries and my anxieties, which I often do, I find that often, even before I'm done, my heart and my worries are, my heart is lighter, my worries seem to be taken away, my burden is lifted in a sense, simply because I've communed, spoken to him who can do that which I cannot. And the next place is to ready my heart and my mind to take a stance against those things that may creep up, the fears that may creep up even after prayer.
I want to add, I think that's really wise, and I think that's a really good habit to form. I have talked about prayer on this podcast before with another person, and I want to ask you this question. I believe in the power of prayer. However, one thing that I still have a stumbling block in my head about it is asking for stuff. And here's why. I feel like when people ask for things when they're praying, it may or may not happen. And sometimes I get worried that, like, if they ask for something and it doesn't happen, then they lose faith. So what's your advice when it comes to prayer about asking for stuff? Like, is it wise to ask God for stuff? Because there's always that possibility that he may or may not make it happen for you. And then if he doesn't make it happen for you, you're going to lose faith, or you're going to think, oh, it doesn't work anymore, or God's not listening. How do you deal with that issue? Because I think that's a really sore point for most, and that's a really
Yeah.
challenging thing to overcome.
Okay, well, that's very understandable. It's very understandable, and I felt the same thing, especially, I would say around, maybe I felt it more when I was between 19 and 23. But the first thing is, absolutely, it's possible. It's absolutely possible, because you're dealing with another person. It's not a person like you are a person, but he's a person nonetheless, in the sense of an autonomous being in the fullest sense of what autonomy is. Will, when we say human beings have free will, well, we don't. We don't really have free will. We have freedom of choice. Very different. If we had free will, it means that we could do anything. No, but we can make choices, and we can make mostly any choice that we want to make. But God has free will. He can do anything he wants to do. And he can, within that free will, is freedom of choice. Somebody listened to many years ago, but what he said stuck in my mind, because it's just true. It's just common sense. It says, as far as he knows, there's only three ways God answers prayer. He says either yes, no, or later. There's no such thing as maybe. It's a matter of yes, no, or later, not now, because you're not, you're just not ready for it. Just like I'm not going, if my son asks me for the keys to my car, I'm going to tell him, later, when you're older. So I think that, it's very possible for there to be a response in the negative. And that's a good thing, because it's reassuring. And it's at least as far as I know, it's reassuring, because you're dealing with somebody who knows, and so you're dealing with somebody, which is important. And you're not dealing with a magical, slot machine, or a magical, vending machine that can, you put in the right quarter, and he gives you the right, right goods, right?
So God is not a genie.
He's not a genie at all. It's furthest thing from it, right? So, one of the things that it's important to keep in mind is that, yeah, you're dealing with another person who does care for you and knows better, whether you like it or not. It's just how it is. It's not, I don't mean the sense of like it or not, like, oh, you better like it or not. No, it really is whether you do like it or whether you do not like it. In the sense of, one of the things I've learned about life is that we don't really like it when we can't manipulate people. And we're grand manipulators. But God is one of those beings that we cannot manipulate at all. Now, that being said, I would say ask for as much as you can, and ask for anything that your heart does desire, because why not? The worst you can get is a no. And if you get a no, it's a no for a good reason. And here's the thing about getting no's. A no can always change. People think God doesn't change his mind. He does change his mind. You look at throughout the Bible, you find that he relents from doing something he wanted to do, and does something he had previously, decided not to do for the sake of somebody, because of the way you asked, because of the humility, because of your persistence, and because of, change of circumstance. And so I would say keep asking and never be discouraged, because you don't never be discouraged when you get a no, because you're not a child. You're not a petulant child. You're an adult. Hopefully you're an adult, And if it's children, there's a different way to handle this. But when you're dealing with adults, so, well, you're a grown up. You know what I mean? You can't have everything you want. You know that. You intrinsically know that. And so don't be discouraged, because actually when you're discouraged, what happens is, we often get, we're beings that once we get discouraged, we don't get better attitudes, we actually get bad attitudes. And that's never a good way. I mean, even people who are, even fathers that are on earth, like worldly, earthly fathers, you come to them asking for something and they tell you no, and then you flip a chair over. You're gonna get a spanking, bruv. You know what I mean? And so I think keep asking, and don't be discouraged. Don't get a bad attitude. Keep asking, and keep a good, and how you say, keep a happy heart, because you have more. You'll have more than you ever expected.
Man, I've never seen someone speak about the word no so positively. And I absolutely agree with you that there are so many things, especially when I was younger, that I may have wanted or asked for, but God knew, like, you're not ready, dude. You're not ready. And what it usually is that if you were given that thing, you would not appreciate it, right? Whether it's a car, whether it's a girlfriend, whether it's a high-paying job, whatever it is, like, if you get stuff before you're ready to get that stuff, you're more likely to abuse it. You're more likely to take it for granted, because you're like, and I like the analogy you used with a child and a car. It's like, if you give the keys to your car to a 12-year-old, they're going to probably crash it into a hydrant or whatever. And it's not that it doesn't mean that they were never meant to drive. It just means that at that moment, they haven't developed the skills and the maturity to actually appreciate the value of a vehicle, of having a car, and so
Yeah.
forth. So I think, and in God's really, because, and on the by and by, people, I do know a number of entitled people who got things way too early. They got, their parents got them cars when they were 16 or whatever, which,
Yeah.
and it kind of ruined them in a way, because like they were flying high as a kite at a very young age, and then it's only downhill from there, right? It's like, well, I was driving when I was 16. How dare you tell me I have to take the bus now? Whereas if you've been riding the bus for 10, 15 years, and then finally you get to drive, that's like, I didn't start driving regularly until I was 31 years old. I was like riding, I'm in New York City, so I'll be real.
Yeah.
Like, a car is not a must. Just waiting that long to drive a car makes me really appreciate it. And maybe if I had been given that car when I was 17 or whatever, I wouldn't appreciate it as much. So sometimes the wait and the maturity and all that stuff is needed. Before we move on from this area, I got to go far, and I got to go into some dark territory.
Let me hear it.
And I did mention this on the previous podcast. I'm curious to see what your response is. What do you say when it comes to prayer and terminal illnesses?
Yeah.
Because okay, we can say, all right, God, I'm not ready to drive a car now. I'm not ready to get married, whatever it is, right? Like, total, I'm not ready to meet Mr. or Mrs. Right. But what happens when it's like, hey, man, you got a year to live, and you wanna live longer? It's like, hey, like, I'm only 25 years old. I don't want to die. What happens when somebody's praying for their illness to go away and then it doesn't? Does one just have to accept that God wants me to die right now? Is that what has to happen in this?
Okay. This is actually this one. I was literally just thinking about this yesterday night. This is one of those things that is, I've heard a lot of people speak about this, and one thing that bugs me in the way I've heard it talked about is this whole idea that, God can do whatever he wants to do, which is true, absolutely. But so how does that help? How does that, what now? It's a matter like, okay, now I feel even stupid for not wanting to die. Like, I don't want to die. Well, okay. So I'll say this. There are people are who have been sick and they've prayed and their lives were completely changed and there was they were healed. It's just that simple. Now they're either healed miraculously or they were healed through some sort of special medical intervention. But the healing does occur. And there are people who pray and they still die. First thing is, we need to understand one thing that's very important. Death for the human being is the most terrifying and often the most tragic thing anyone could possibly experience. Because it's death, it is moving into what we believe to be nothingness, right? Is you're done, you're no thing, you're finished, you're out of the universe and never will be, never will return. Okay, so, but this isn't really the case in the sense of it's kind of like when you put children down to sleep, they're always, and this is something my friend noticed, a good friend of mine, and he said, he's noticed that kids don't want to sleep, not because of what they're being called towards, or what they're being called from. The sleep is removing them to sleep. But what's most important is it's also removing them from all the fun they're having and all the games they're playing and all the people around them. And that's what they're kicking against. Because when they end up sleeping, they end up sleeping. And when parents often say, oh, he looks so peaceful when he sleeps. Well, they're enjoying their sleep because they're supposed to. It's kind of like that. But with death, it's twofold. We have no idea what we're moving towards. Often we don't. Christians often believe that we're moving, going back to God. And that's why often Christians don't have this, or even many religions, and those who have a specific, like a personal God, they often believe they're moving back to their personal God. And so there's a sense of peace, but there's still the kicking against what they're moving away from, especially if it's a young person moving away from their future, moving away from their parents, their wives and kids, and moving away from their job, and the potential that their future held. And that's the hardest part. But death is, as far as I know, and I've never died, just so you know. And so it's
some might say that the period before you were born was death.
Yeah, I've heard about that too. Yeah, so it's twofold, because we often don't know what we're moving towards, but we certainly don't want to be moving away from where we are. And so that's what's really scary about it. But the honest thing is that God knows what we're moving towards. Though he understands what we're moving away from, he also knows what we're moving towards. And, especially according to the Christian faith, the idea is often the case that we are moving towards something better. And so it's very different. And this is because I'm speaking from a very Christian, worldview. It's going to be hard for me to articulate this in a way for those who don't see things the way I do. And then if I was to meet someone like that personally, it'd probably be a different answer. But God sees death. Should I say sees death, right? God's interaction with death is not the way we interact with death. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland. We're being pulled down the rabbit hole. It's terrifying, but we're going to a very wonderful, and very strange encounter. But it's the Mad Hatter who knows what we're about to encounter. We don't know. And so you keep kicking against the Mad Hatter and saying, I don't want to go. But the Mad Hatter is like, trust me, bruv, it's not going to be as bad as you think. So I think that God's perspective on death is far greater than ours. It's different. And he sometimes he's still going to pull us towards it. because he knows what we don't know. But now, when it comes to praying for those who are terminally ill, I would say, yeah, a person, and there's two things about this. There are those who have, how you say, power. I'm not a powerful man, and I'm talking about spiritual power. Now, people, I'm sure there are going to be many listeners who are like, ha, spiritual power. I didn't come here for spiritual power. I came here for philosophy. Well, yeah, philosophy and
Spiritual
religion
power could be looking down the barrel of a gun and not flinching, because
and not flinching.
you're just that confident that, like, okay, whatever, I'm dead now, no biggie. I'm not saying,
Yeah,
like, that's spiritual power. Yeah.
yeah, and so there are those who have the spiritual power. There's the who have a certain kind of spiritual power that has some sort of mystical, how you say, a spiritual and mystical dominion over the human body. And when they pray, things happen over the human body. Personally, I don't understand it, but I cannot deny that this is, how you say, I cannot deny that that there's evidence for this. You have people like, how you say, in the past, like John J. Lake. You have the Christ, you have the apostles, and the claims of the Bible. So when they pray, things happen. When I pray for people who are sick, I don't know that anything's happening. I'm going to be honest with you. But I know there are people like that in this world. I'm just not one of them. Now, does that mean that I shouldn't pray? Well, not necessarily, because it's kind of like, though I don't have the power, I know somebody who does. It's the same thing. I'm not the author of life. I'm not the biggest, baddest being in this world. A bullet could take me out. Hell, a toothpick could take me out. If you've seen John Wick, a pencil could take a person out, you know? But God does have the power. And so because he has the power, I'm appealing to him that if in his mercy, if in his kindness, simply because we've asked, not that the person is going to something horrible, but because we've asked, that the person may live. But then again, it comes back to what we had spoken about before. He's still a being who can choose, like a king can choose to release a prisoner or not. King can choose to be a benefactor. Oh, sorry, to be is it a benefactor? And I think a benefactor is the one who receives. But he can be benevolent, or choose to withdraw his hand. So it all comes down to his choices and so forth. And at the end of the day, of course, it's painful. And of course, we don't understand all these things. And I'm here speaking confidently about things that I do not have 100% grasp on at all. But I think we should still pray, especially if our hearts move us to pray. If there is the grief and the desire for the person to live, we should absolutely pray, because one never knows when one's prayer will be answered. There's this curious story about C.S. Lewis's stepson. I think his name is Graham. I forget his first name. Is it Graham? Something Graham? Yeah. He had prayed for his mother to be healed because she was dying, and he was just a kid. He was just a kid, and he remembered in his being, in his soul, when you know that you know. He said he remembered knowing that he knew that she was going to be okay, and he went home and she began to recover, and she spent about, I think, 6 years or so with him. I think maybe something along the lines, like, don't quote me on those numbers, but she spent a good time, long time with him and Lewis. And then the sickness came back. And by then he was a much older lad, and he went back to that church, or to that area where he had prayed before, and he prayed again. And he heard this time in his heart that if you want me to do it, I will do it. And he remembered thinking, there was something along the lines of, he knew it was time, that he was okay. He was going to be okay without her. He didn't need her anymore. And he simply said, it's okay. That will be done. Let it be what you want it to be. And then she died not too long afterwards. But this is interesting because, like I said, the most important part here is the people's relationship with death. Because if death to you is the worst thing that could possibly happen, this is all I'm saying. Everything I'm saying here is complete and utter nonsense. But for those who understand and who have ears to hear and understand what I mean, what I'm getting at, then yes, it's not the end of all things. And absolutely pray, because one never knows. And if it does not go the way you want it to go, don't kick against the goad. Don't be too discouraged.
Wow, there's a lot of wisdom to unpack here. So first off, I think that I just give a lot of credit to religious folk, during this pandemic especially, and just during any sort of troubling times, because the topic of this conversation is change, but in the back of my head I knew that the ultimate change is death, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's and once you conquer, or I don't know if anyone can fully conquer the fear of death, but once you are more comfortable with death, then other forms of change aren't so bad, right? Like, so like
Yeah.
if you're no longer worrying about death, chances are you're not going to worry about being laid off from your job. Right? Like so
Yeah.
you have to conquer, you kind of have to conquer the biggest giant in the room, and then once you conquer the biggest giant in the room, everything
Everyone
else,
else looking pretty small.
yeah, everything, yeah, everyone else is like, 4 feet tall, right, compared
Yeah.
to the biggest giant in the room. And I think ultimately, yes, if you have God, if you have religion, if you have some form of faith-based system, death isn't all that bad. I will put a caveat there. I think if you have done some pretty darn wicked things in your life, and this is why I always say that the good people always have the final laugh. Because if look, am I perfect? No. Like is it, maybe, who knows, maybe we'll all get in trouble for like stealing that candy bar when we were 8 or something. Like,
Yeah.
fine, okay. But generally speaking, if you're confident and you know it, you don't have to justify it, you just know it in your heart, you know it in your soul. If you've generally been a decent fella or a decent gal, death doesn't worry you so much, because and that's kind of your reward, right? If you've been a decent person, you've been fair and square with as many people as possible, okay, I've done a few bad things, but ultimately I'm on par with everyone else, maybe even a little better or whatever. It's not going to be so bad, right?
Yeah.
It's only when you've done a bunch of wicked stuff and now you're like, uh-oh, 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 like, right? Like, because that's what happens, right? Like, and no matter, oh, I don't believe anything, I believe I'm just gonna rot in the ground, blah blah blah. It's like, I don't care what your lips are saying about rotting in the ground. You still, and that might be the case, right? No, you don't know, I don't know, you might just end up rotting in the ground, but you still have that giant what if, right? And if you've been a wicked person, that what if really begins to haunt you at night, right?
Yeah.
Because especially when you get up there in age, if you've killed 15 people and now you're 85 years old, you're like, uh-oh. Like,
Yeah.
every doctor visit is really scaring you. But if you've been a decent person, the doctor visits don't scare you anymore. You, okay, like, all right, I might have to repent for that candy bar when I was 8, but no biggie. And this is like the power. This is truly like the power of faith, and having religion, having God, and having some kind of faith-based system in your life, because it allows you to atone and sort of cleanse your soul for the next life, if you so believe in that, right? The other thing I want to tackle and I want to kind of address what you're saying with prayer. What about this idea that, and this kind of goes back to this idea that we all have a life's mission, and as soon as we fulfill our life's mission, God kind of just pulls the plug on us. He's like, okay, you've done your job, it's time for you to go. Whether you did something really good for this world, or you did something bad for this world, or something mediocre, like in that example with C.S. Lewis, or C.S. Lewis's brother.
No, his stepson.
Stepson, I'm sorry. Okay, in the C.S. Lewis example, I think that it's like he keeps that person around until God knows, like, you can deal without them, right? And that's like, just, you fulfilled your mission. Like, you were put on this earth to be a custodian to this person or a mentor to that person. It's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's like, all right, I've done my job getting Luke off this planet. It's time for me to go. So I'm wondering if perhaps, instead of necessarily praying for people to keep living, we just pray like, hey God, I trust that letting this person live or die is the right thing to do. Because ultimately, I think God knows what your plan is, he knows your mission, and he doesn't keep you on this earth a second longer then he has to, right? Like what, like why would he do that? Why, like, there's no, like, everyone here has, like, it's like a video game. There's like the main story mission, and then there's like the side quests, right? And with God, there's no side quests. It's like once you've fulfilled your story mode and the credits roll, you're done. You're over. And that's not something sad, it's something positive. It means you've done whatever it is that you were meant to do on this earth, and now it's time for you to go. So I'm wondering if, instead of being like, please, please keep this person alive, please keep them alive, maybe it's just a question of coming to terms with, did this person fulfill their mission or did they not fulfill their mission? How does that interpretation sound to you?
Well, I think, it's personally, I think that it's a better way than the fear. The fear is understandable, but like most, how you say, but it's the foundation. It's how we all began. It's the fear, and so I would say that this is the next place, is coming to terms with the fact that death is inevitable, and then if you have this understanding that life means something and that people are here for reasons, then it's no longer a matter of, keeping them alive for as long as possible, because there are greater things at hand. There's a greater task. There's a greater, how do you say, greater theme. And so I think that it's actually far better for a person's state of mind, and it shows a certain level of maturity, because what you're worried about is no longer the fact that the person is dying, but are they dying well? Are they dying? Because death will come for us all, whether we know it or not, like it or not, it will come. But to understand that there is more to death, there is more to life and death than simply living and dying, but there is purpose, and being far more concerned with that purpose I think, is a mature step, above the fear.
Okay, because I think the people that we really need to help out here are our 20-year-olds or whatever. Because if you're 83 years old and you have like 3 Nobel Peace Prizes or something, and then death comes knocking your door, you're like, all right, I got 3 Nobel Prizes. Like, it's time for me to go. Like, right then, it's like it's evident. It's like it's evident that you fulfilled your life's mission. Let's try and help our 23-year-olds or 24-year-olds who might brush across death, and they might, it might be this, come on, man, I'm 24, I don't deserve to die. Come on now, come on, right? But maybe it's a question of, like, you were 24 but you did everything that you were supposed to do, and you finished the game early. And I think a really good example of someone who finished the game early is Jim Morrison, the lead singer of the Doors. Okay, and he's in the 27 Club. He died at the age of 27, tragically. I mean, I'm not trying to say like it was beautiful. He died, I believe, of a drug overdose. So it's not something that was glamorous, but the things that he achieved, like the songs that he wrote, all before the age of 27, which is insane. It's insane that I'm like years older than him right now, and this guy has achieved things that I could only imagine dreaming, and the guy is several years younger than me. So I'm wondering, in my head, it's like, okay, it's tragic that he died when he did, but perhaps people could celebrate that he fulfilled his life's mission at 27, right? Like, at 27, he did everything that God wanted him to do. And therefore, once he completed his mission, it was time for him to go. And this is a tricky thought, man, because then people are going to be like, well, I'll just delay fulfilling my life's mission so I can live longer. And it's a slippery slope, right? It's not an easy, like,
Yeah,
it's kind of, it leaves a lot of things untied.
but it depends. So it depends on if the world does actually work that way. We're saying that that as a theory is better than the fear, but evidence to support that the world actually works that way, I mean, it's not possible to know. It's like saying that one knows the mind of God, and the mind of God in the sense of, what people's purpose actually is. So a man could create all the beautiful artworks that he or she, that he's capable of making, and then die. And we say, well, he must have done everything he was supposed to do. Well, maybe, because the artworks may have been, how you say, a a nice side mission while he was alive, but it might have been something else. There might have been more to the story. But like we said earlier, this is simply a theory of how, this is the theory of how the world, how the cosmos works. It's not the actual, because we don't know for a fact that this is the actuality. Because we find that, okay, babies die. Well, what was their purpose? Did they accomplish anything? Was the purpose just to breathe once and disappear? Or how about when if a woman carries a child for 9 months, and the day before she was supposed to give birth, she gets hit by a bus? And what about her life's purpose? Was it simply to carry that child for that specific amount of time? And so it gets very complicated, and it gets to that place where people say, well, I'll just sit down and eat Doritos. That couldn't possibly be my life's purpose. And then it's like, okay, but
I actually have a theory on like, a lot of people will be like, oh well, hold on now, like like women, I'm generalizing here, okay, and I apologize to my listeners for generalizing, but I know that women who have had miscarriages, when they end up having another child that goes full term, they tend to really love and appreciate the next child that they've had, because they've gone through the pain and the suffering of having a miscarriage. Okay. Now look, man, I'm not trying to, say, oh, well, that first child had to go in order for the mother to appreciate the second child or whatever. I'm just noticing that, like, even I'm saying, if you really think about it, even something as tragic as a stillborn child there might be something more to it than just it was a random occurrence. It might be that's priming the mother to really appreciate the next child. Maybe without that stillborn, the mother would not have appreciated having a child as much, but then that pain of having a stillborn then, like, transformed her in such a way to really love the next child that came. Again, like, I'm not trying to play with
yeah,
people's emotions, and this is beyond my pay grade as to why these things happen. But if you really think about anything, you can always find a justification for it in some crazy way.
yeah. So I would say that I can understand that, and it's something like that when it comes to the child. Is, I mean, I have a couple of friends who've had miscarriages. I've never had the sad happenings of that happening to me, but I would say that it's more the effect, and not, so it's like this causation versus effect. So it's maybe the joy that comes, the appreciation of having the child that lives, is the effects of the ones you lost, not necessarily the causation. So it's not necessarily that, people often say God puts you through hard trials so that you can, well, maybe, I don't know, but it seems as though, because two people could go through the exact same thing and come out very different. One comes out more grateful, more thankful, and the other comes out bitter and miserable to the core. And so I would say that it's the cause is unknown to me. The cause is one of those things that, when we say, well, shit happens, life is full of topsy-turvy roller coaster batty waddy happenings, and batty waddy um, and we all learn from it. I can sit down at a coffee shop and learn two or three things about the world, absolutely. Now, was I intended to learn any of those things? Well, I can't say for sure, but I know that the effect of what I witnessed is the learning. The effect of what I witnessed is this new information being, being accumulated by me. So people who lose, I would say that the hard things, the bad things, the difficult things, the pains of this world, I don't know whether or not they're there by causation to teach you something, but I would say that there is always something to learn by the effects of those things happening to you.
To play devil's advocate with myself, a lot of people would accuse, like with the example I just used with the stillborn, a lot of people would accuse me, Aaron, that's a coping mechanism. You're using a coping mechanism. You're like, crazy batshit things happen to you, and you're using this all as a giant coping mechanism. And my response to that is yes, and if that yes, and if that if
Thank
that
you.
if that makes my life better and gives meaning and purpose to the sequence of events that happened in my life, why is that so wrong? You know what I mean? Like if I
Yeah.
come up with these elaborate justifications for bad things that have happened to me, and the key thing is it makes me stronger, it makes me wiser, gives my life more meaning and purpose, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. You know,
Thank you.
use whatever it takes to get through this thing called life. That's what I say. You know what I mean? It's like we invented morphine for a reason, so that when you have surgery, you're not in pain. You know, like it's not, use whatever you can get out of this world to make it work for you. And I, I think that people will say, because I think people who don't try and find meaning in their life and just think that everything is just a bunch of random dots. It's all just a random dots. It's all random. It doesn't make any sense. It's all random. In my experience, that tends, like, people who think that way tend to do pretty awful stuff because they think it doesn't matter. So my point is that if you just completely say it's all just a giant mystery, I don't know how it works, it's all just random dots, it's all scatter plot and whatnot, it's like you're going to probably go with the more selfish road. You're going to go with the most self-serving road. You're going to seek a lot of pleasure. But I think when you are doing the hard work and trying to figure out meaning with all of these random dots, I think you'd actually be surprised. It's like, remember when you were a kid, there were those books of random dots and they had numbers attached to them, like 1, 2. But then when you actually connected all those dots, like a cool cat or something, or Mickey Mouse came, remember? So
Yeah, yeah.
I think,
Connect the dots. The
yeah, but when you
yeah.
look at the dots at first glance, they just look like random dots. But then you connect the first dot to the second dot and the third dot, and then you've got a cool cat. I think there's some value in trying to dig meaning out of your life. It's not just a bunch of random tragedy and stuff. Because if you
Yeah.
don't do that, I feel like you're going to err on the side of awful behavior.
The beautiful thing about, that's why I really I love these, I love the cosmos. The beautiful thing about, the person who says that it's all random and that there is nothing and then they do what they want to do, well, they've simply said that life is irrational. But now I'm going to use my rationality to live out an irrational life. So it's a matter of, they say it's all random, but they cannot help but live rationally based on that assumption about life. So the human beings, we are desperately rational people. We are. Unfortunately, we're rational to a point and then we stop. But we can't help it. We can't help it. There's we and I'm yet to see a person, walking on their hands rather than on their feet, and using their feet to pick up spoons and cups. Except for there was a young man who had lost his arms, born without arms and legs. He was using his feet, but he's a different case. But I'm very, very, very talented and unusual situation. But usually we try to make sense out of life. Even when we say life doesn't make sense, we're using sense to say, to make sense about a life that doesn't make sense. And so it's kind of, it's very interesting, and very interesting situation. But yeah, I mean, I would say that there's nothing wrong with escape. There's nothing wrong with coping with life, and it's understandable. I mean, some people take it to a very destructive, self-destructive, and socially destructive level. And I wouldn't recommend that, but I would recommend escape in the most, how you say, in the most wholesome way. I remember reading, or listening to a book by Neil Gaiman, where he had said this quote. I believe he attributed it to Lewis, but I can't be sure. But I think it was Lewis. It says that, and it goes something like this: that the only people who are hell bent on keeping you from escaping are jailers. And so there's nothing wrong with escape. The question is, how do you escape? How long do you escape? And are you willing to come back to reality after escaping for a little bit? Because I think we all need to escape for a little bit.
I hear you on this because like sometimes if you focus a little too much on the darkness that has happened and you can't make sense of it in that moment, it can drive you crazy. It's kind of like that book, the Killing Joke with the Joker or whatever, and he just can't make any sense of his life, and then he turns into the Joker or something like that. And I get it. Like go to the movies and have fun. It's better to go to the movies and have a good time than turn into the next Joker. I
Yeah.
completely I completely agree with you on that. But you do have to, like, you can visit an island for a little fun, but eventually you do need to come back to the mainland. And the main,
Yeah.
like, the island is irrationality and the mainland is the rational mind, right? So it's okay, you can have a little fun on the island of irrationality, but you need to come back to one of the main continents at some point. And here's why. Because if you live too long on the island, then you're using irrationality to justify your bad behavior, right? Like because what happens is that I think that bad people just say it's all going to burn down, it's all irrational, so they use this irrationality and the randomness of the universe as a
Rationalized.
yeah, they use their irrationality as a tool to justify their bad behavior, right? So when they steal something, when they hurt another human being, they're like, there's no consequences, there's no rhyme or reason to this universe, I can do whatever the hell it is that I want. And if you live in that arena for too long, I think you're missing the point of life.
The
Again,
island of strange foods. Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, you got to come back. You got to come back home, and there's a lot of things to be done, and there's lots of people who need your help. There's a lot for you to do, so you got to come back home. Yeah.
I want to kind of get back to the topic of change.
To change the topic, one might say.
Yeah, right. We're changing again. So I think that I think we can sum this up. I don't think this needs to be a two-part episode. I think we can sum this up within the next 10 minutes. So whether whether it's the status quo, whether it's radical change in your life, I think perhaps acceptance that it's the hand of God or it's the hand of like I think the phrase "it was meant to be," and I know that's the most ultimate cliche, and it pisses people off. It was meant to be. It was meant to be that my son died. I get it. It's when people hear the words "it was meant to be," there's almost a little bit of cruelty in it because like you're asking that person to just accept the most atrocious thing that ever happened to them and just be like, oh, it was meant to be. However, there's a lot of power and strength in accepting it was meant to be, because when good times come, you don't get too excited and you don't get too comfortable, like, right? Because when good times are here, you're not too dependent on the good times in order to feel happy. And that helps you out because when the bad times come, which they always do, you also realize, like, I'm not too invested in these bad times. It's just meant to be. Just it's meant to rain. Like it was meant to be sunny on Tuesday, and it was meant to be thunder showers on Wednesday. So as hard, like I think once you get over the cruelty of it was meant to be, you can also see the compassion and the happiness that it was meant to be brings into your life.
Yeah, I mean, I could understand that absolutely. The meant to be idea. I think it's a half true, because I think there's a factor that that tends to escape us, and that's human intervention. That's choice, because when you say that something is meant to be, you're saying that it was predestined, it was forespoken, ordained. But that gets into very muddy waters, and here's why. When something is meant to be, that often removes, if not always removes,
Individual
choice.
individual agency. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it gets to a place where, you know, saw this movie once, or I guess I can use any movie. So it's a matter of matter, it's a young man gets shot by his cousin playing video games. And someone says, well, it was meant to be. Well, sure. So what part was meant to be? Was it the part? Was it the part that Was it the part that the cousin was going to choose, no matter no matter who he was, no matter how he grew up, no matter what he valued in life, he was just going to end up shooting his cousin? Or are you saying that that young man was just supposed to die that specific day, and if he wasn't getting shot, he was getting hit by a bus? And then in that case, still, the driver, he made choices that brought him there. He made choices, and so I think the meant to be thing, the meant to be is though I believe I have believed that, but I can't say that that's the entirety of how the cosmos works, and simply because of free agency. But I will say that the hard things that happen, though I can't say exactly why they happen. um, the hard things, the bad things, the difficult things, the tragic things, the grieving things that happen to human beings, the change, and it's usually change, right? I mean, if things are going good, they're going good, and then boom, change comes along, good old change. One of the most wonderful things we can learn, one of the good things we can learn in this life is how to accept change when it comes, no matter how difficult or how good. Some people are very, a friend once told me that he was asked by a man, he said, are you scared of success? And I realized that he was scared of success. So we have people who are actually scared of good things happening to them. So I would say that no matter what the change is, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, it's very helpful when we can come to terms with accepting it. It's very helpful when we can come to terms with knowing that this is just the way of the cosmos. This is the way things are.
I like your objections to it was meant to be. I think there's some good points. This is where my Stoic teachings are going to kind of play a hand in this. Okay.
Amen, brother.
we see. I'm combining Greek philosophy, religion. It's all the ingredients are there. Sometimes you need
Welcome
celery.
to Truth
Sometimes
Island, baby.
sometimes you need celery. Sometimes you need carrots. Sometimes you need onions in your soup. Whatever works. Whatever gets that soup
whatever,
going, right?
whatever gets the soup going, man.
so
Whenever you're
stoicism,
hungry.
so stoicism would tell us this. When it comes to it was meant to be, because let's just say, for example, you're working at a company and you're a janitor. It's very easy to say it was meant to be. I was preordained to hold this mop for all eternity. And like it does remove human agency from that individual. Like, okay, are you really meant to just be a janitor for the rest of your life? Is that really true? Or are you just using that meant to be as an excuse to not improve yourself, right? Depends where we are in history. There are times in history where that was true. Like I think of in India, they had something called the caste system, and the position that you were born into was what it was meant to. It was literally it was meant to be. Like you're not. There's nothing you could do in your power. So I think when it comes to it was meant to be situations, you have to ask yourself, do I have any agency over this situation? Okay, so whatever situation you find yourself in life, you have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, do I have agency to change the situation? Can I find a new job? Can I seek a promotion? Can I quit? Can I do this? Can I do that? And if the answer is yes, I can change this situation, then it wasn't meant to be because you have agency or you have power over that situation. However, where I think it was meant to be really, really, really helps and it becomes like an awesome pillow to snuggle with is when you don't actually have power over that situation because that allows you to sleep well at night when you don't have any agency over that situation. And I think for like the things that happen to you in childhood, a lot of that stuff is it was meant to be because when you're a kid, you don't decide who your parents are. You don't decide where you go to school. You don't
Yeah.
decide many things about what happens. So a lot of our early childhood experiences belong in the realm of it was meant to be because there's nothing that you and terminal illnesses belong in that sphere in that category. So I think the maturity comes from asking yourself, do I have power over, it's like a tree diagram or whatever. It's like, do I have power over this situation? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then change the situation to the best of your ability. If the answer is no, rest easy knowing that it was meant to be.
Yeah, no need fighting, no need fighting in like an impossible battle. Yeah, I can see that absolutely. That's why I think it's a half truth. It's a yes and a no, and yeah, I can see that absolutely.
And to maybe help people with regret a little bit, I think there's like a small it was meant to be, and then there's a larger it was meant to be. And it's like, oh my God, I should not have married that girl when I was 23, right? And it's like, okay, you had agency over that particular situation, but you making that mistake was a part of a larger it was meant to be, right? Like because you had that terrible marriage when you were 23, when you then get married at 33, now you're that much more wiser. So I think there's layers to this. Like, I don't want people to just fall into that it was meant to be as a catch-all excuse for life, but it also helps justify past mistakes of like, well, the amount of failure that I experienced then allowed me to now learn from that and become this. And I do believe that in the back of my head, I'm not too hard on myself. I'm a little hard on myself, but not too hard on myself anymore,
Yeah,
because I say to myself, it was a part of the larger, it was meant to be existence, right? It was a part of the larger meant to be. That doesn't mean that I can just sit on my couch and do nothing all day, but it
get
allows
rid
me
of.
to it allows me to forgive myself for some of the stupidity that I may have done when I was younger. Kenny,
God
thank you.
bless our younger selves.
Yes, Kenny, thank you so much for helping all of us deal with some change here.
Aaron, thank you for having me.
This concludes the 150th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.